Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. This is a BookTube reading event for the month of June, created by Michael K. Vaughan, where we talk about Westerns. It's a ton of fun. We're reading and talking about Westerns all month long. I have a Western I read last night that I want to talk to you about, but before I do, I want to remind myself, I want to remember to shout out a viewer on this channel named Peter, who is right now in hospital going through an ordeal that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And I want to thank him for watching these videos. I don't know if he watches every video, and I don't know if he watches themed videos like this, but I want to thank him for watching these videos. If they're helping in any way to make this experience any easier, I am honored that that is true, and I would love it if you want to, if you're watching this video, feel free to leave, a thumbs up comment for, not a literal thumbs up, but an actual comment in the comments field to Peter, to let him know that we're all on his side, that we're all hoping he gets through this in rapid order. I'm sure that if he watches this video, I'm sure he'll read the comments, and I'm sure that that would perk him up. And if you've spent any length of time in a hospital, you look for things like that. You look for something that will pick you up. Certainly, I'm wishing you the best, Peter. So, but anyway, we're going to move on to the Western that we're doing for today. This is from the 1950s. Yes, 1958. This is Veckel Howard's book, Tall in the West, which is, it's a split brain type thing. It isn't completely effective, but half of it is. It opens with on the Dodge City Trail outside of Dodge City, out in the plains of the American West, with buzzards circling in the sky. Now, the buzzards are pretty busy as this novel begins, because the action centers on buffalo hunters, a group of shaggy, disreputable, blood-spattered buffalo hunters who are following herds and wiping them out, shooting them, then skinning them. They just leave the meat to rot. So they're living off the meat, but they leave most of the meat to rot, which means there are buzzards everywhere, and coyotes and wolves everywhere. And two of those buffalo hunters notice that some buzzards are circling around a little arroyo, and they don't know why. There are no buffalo anywhere near there. And what they find there is a man. They find a man in very expensive clothes. He's an impressive figure, tall and well-made. The book is very obviously in love with this man, with a cruel gash on his head. And they assume he's dead. They steal his money. They cut his money belt off him and divide his money between them. And when they're starting to steal his gun and boots, it turns out he's alive. He wakes up almost by instinct and grabs one of them in a steel-like grip. There's nothing weak about it at all. And they tell him, they apologize, and they say, we thought you were dead. We're glad you're alive. What's your story? What's going on here? And he can't remember. He can't remember anything about himself. He can't remember his name. Can't remember how he got there, or what these nice clothing, anything of his past at all. He doubles up on one of their horses as they make their way back to the camp of the buffalo hunters, and the leader, the sort of gang boss of these buffalo hunters, says, "Well, you can't remember anything about yourself at all. Well, you're free to muck in with us." And if you're any good, if you can handle a knife or a gun, if you can handle yourself in a tense situation, then you'll get your share of the profits. Maybe you could buy a saddle or even a horse. But they have to name him something, and he doesn't have a name. And they've just recently lost one of their hunters. His horse stepped in a prairie dog hole and fell on top of him and broke his neck. So his name was Abel, and they just start calling this guy Abel. As the leader of the buffalo hunters says, the dead man isn't using his name anymore. You might as well use it. So he calls himself Abel, and he mucks in with these buffalo hunters. And it turns out he's really good at it, the best at it, better than their former top hunter, a seedy, horrible brute of a man who's really strong, but he's not the kind of strength that Abel has. The narrator goes on and on about how he seems almost like a god brought to earth. He seems like a different kind of human being. He is immensely strong, yes, but he's tall and shapely and very glorious looking. He seems not to be, a rank, low-level mucker in. And he seems very, very capable with a gun, with his hands, with a knife. So the muscle memory stuff he hasn't forgotten. He's forgotten all of the forebrain stuff about who he is and how he got where he is. But he mucks in with them, catches their foremost hunter cheating at a bet that they have, and disables him in a fight. But eventually he becomes so successful that the leader of the buffalo hunters stays true to his word and says, "You've earned enough to buy a saddle, a horse. You can go your own way now. Can't go your own way without that." But he decides, Abel decides after a while, if we follow him the narrative follows him as he's wandering around in the wilderness, he decides to go to a nearby city and try and figure out what's going on. He's thinking that maybe he was a hand on a cattle drive, and hurt himself, and that's how he lost his memory. So he checks with a local saloon keeper about cattle drives and cattle men in the area, and they have a rather nice little scene where the other man is trying to jog his memory, even takes down a map of Texas, and says, maybe some of these city or town names will jog your memory. In the midst of rattling off Texas towns, he includes Shakespeare, hoping that will jog his memory, because Shakespeare is an author, that he assumes what every character in the first half of this book assumes, which is that Abel, whoever he really is not a common man. They assume from his appearance that he had extremely good breeding, that he's extremely well trained. He rides his horse, as we're told, like either a cavalryman or a Sioux. He rides his horse in a way that isn't just hacking along. This saloon owner just assumes that, you'll have an education too. There ought to be some way to jog your memory, but it doesn't work. So Abel goes off on a series of adventures. He goes to the nearest cattle driving ranch boss to see if maybe, when I walk up on your porch, will you recognize me and tell me who I am? Nothing is coming back to him at all in the first half of the book. And he keeps having adventures. Because as we saw with, as he demonstrated with that crook in the buffalo hunting ring, he still has an ironclad sense of right and wrong. And you were reading this, I was reading this book. It's not long. It's like, I don't know anything about Veckel. This is, 100 pages long. I don't know anything about Veckel Howard at all. I get the impression from this book that he probably wrote a lot, like a lot of Western authors do. But I was reading along, happy. He is a very efficient narrator. I was reading along and I was perfectly happy until Abel's subsequent adventures bring him in contact with a woman. And it is clear that Veckel Howard wants her to be the love interest of the book, and everything changes about the book. Everything does. It's not just, I don't want to spoil, I don't know that you're ever going to come across a copy of this book, I don't want to spoil it, but it's not just the resolution of the plot line about who this character is that changes in the second half of the book. It's that a love story is introduced, and then the whole tone of the book changes. It goes from being hard-edged and really gripping and really good in the first half to being reheated Sir Walter Scott in the second half that it's almost embarrassing to read. It's a completely different book. And it lowered my estimation of this book. If I gave star counts to books, it would definitely have dropped stars on this book. But it also made me think about that aspect of Western, the romance aspect. Now, Sarah at the Bookish Knitter, our romance queen on BookTube, her participation in June on the Range is looking at specifically Western-themed romances. So she's not going to have to worry about this. But it made me think about all the Westerns that I have read for June on the Range last year, all the ones that I'm reading this year, and all the ones that I've read in between, and how poorly they tend to do romances. It made me start to wonder, again, why men go to these novels. Why, especially men of 2 generations ago, went to these novels in such huge numbers. What are they getting? What are they identifying with? And is part of the appeal of these books how invariably awkward with ladies the main character always is? Abel, whoever he is, has a tremendous amount of self-assurance. He's not gawking or bumbling. He's not an awkward, fumbling incel when it comes to ladies. But there's still an awkwardness here, an artificiality, a stiffness, a formality that doesn't enter into his dealings with any other characters in the book. And that happens often in Westerns. It's all over the place in Louis L'Amour. All of a sudden the characters start talking like, Sir Galahad. It's totally out of character for the characters, and the writer never seems to care or to notice, and the reader is obviously supposed to enjoy it. It's really awkward to me. It almost never doesn't happen. So I'm wondering again what all the rest of you think when you're reading Westerns for June on the Range 2023 or for at any time. What do you think when the two-fisted, gun-toting hero comes across, Miss Lula May from the schoolhouse, and all of a sudden everything changes about the book? Is that a fundamental appeal of these things? That awkward, I don't even know, compartmentalizing of women into some sort of alien species? It very markedly does not happen in Lonesome Dove, but it happens in almost every other Western that I read. It definitely happened here. The book changes horses in midstream. It's so dramatic that it's like you're reading something by a different author. I don't think I've ever read anything by Vekal Howard other than this. So I don't know if he's always like this when it gets to when his character stops dealing with horses and starts dealing with young fillies. I really don't know, but it made it hard going for me to get to the resolution of the main plot of Abel. His identity is what happened to him and what he's going to do about it. That is obviously the driving point of a plot about amnesia, any amnesia plot. You can't avoid it. And to give this author his due, he does get around to it, and there is a really good, say, last 10 pages of this book. Really well done. But I had to wade through a lot of... it's not even just the dialogue changes, the narrative changes. The narrative suddenly becomes syrupy and silly when it's dealing with that aspect. Makes me wonder, of course, June on the Range is always a launching pad for me to ask you nosy questions as well. It made me wonder if you think the same thing. Do you find that in these things? But anyway, that was my experience for last night, Tall in the West. I think for tonight, I'm just sort of doing a roulette wheel for these things. I'm just reading a new one, like popping them down like cotton candy, because I love to talk about this sort of thing. And June on the Range is such a wonderful event. I will pick another Western for tonight. The only parameter that I'm kind of sort of setting in my mind ahead of time is that I might feel like reading another print and paper book. I have tons of Western ebooks. But I bought a ton of print and paper books over the course of the year in anticipation of June on the Range. I think I might burn through a few of those before I go to ebooks. I don't know, that might not hold true, but if I read another Western tonight, you can count on me yarning about it tomorrow. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.